Hey everybody, Rich here, South Florida Beekeeping with Rich. What you're about to watch is a video of a talk I gave on February the 13th to the Tropical Beekeepers Association down in Miami, Florida. They're kind of headquartered out of the Redlands area, using the Hineland Fruit and Spice Park as their headquarters. I envy them that. And so I did a talk for them on preventing swarms and getting in there early and techniques to be used to prevent swarming in your hives.
But to be honest, you got on a lot of tangents because they asked a lot of
Boy, they asked a
questions.
lot of questions, and so I answered a lot of questions, and we went off on a bunch of tangents, and we had a good time.
So this might be a two-parter.
It is undoubtedly going to be a two-parter. Uh, so just give it a watch and see how you like it.
A while ago, I was looking on the internet. If you look on YouTube, a lot of the beekeeping videos are geared towards the Northwest and Midwest, where it gets cold and you have to winter your bees. And when we're down here, it's like winter your bees. What does that mean, winter your bees? So I looked up South Florida beekeeping, and the first thing that I came across was Rich's channel, Rich Field, South Florida Beekeeping with Rich, and I just started watching video after video after video, and him and that they're together like Gracie and George Burns, right?
George Burns and Gracie.
Gracie, the two of them together are hilarious, and so much information that comes out from these videos. So I went to go see Bob Denny up in West Palm, and I said, he's going to be here. And I introduced myself, and it turned out we had met before because they come down here for Spice, and they stop by our booth that we have here. So I called him up and I said, would you please come and talk to us? I'd love to have you. I'd recommend his YouTube channel. We'll talk a little bit about that later. I started at the oldest videos and started working my way up. Just a wealth of knowledge. He's here today talking about swarm and swarm control. So without further ado, Mr. Rich Field. Thank you, sir.
Hey everybody, how you doing? So how many people here, I've always heard that the Miami Bee Club was heavy on the commercial side. So who here is a backyard beekeeper first? Okay, well, it looks like most of you, except for you. Your son is a commercial beekeeper, and there was a guy here who had a T-shirt on. So didn't your T-shirt have something on the back that indicated that you have a bee outfit? Okay, removals. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Oh, good. So you're my target audience, the backyard beekeepers. That's good. Because I don't have a whole lot for commercial guys. I threw in a tiny bit in here, but not a whole lot. Okay, swarming and swarm control. Other parts of the country have a swarm season. 2 months, 3 months. If you can take a few measures to get you past that 2 or 3 month period, then it's unlikely that your bees are going to swarm for the rest of the year. Unlikely, not impossible. You'll get some late season swarms, but unlikely. Down here, we don't have a beekeeping season. We have a 3 month period where our bees are a little less likely to swarm in the middle of summer, but during the dearth period and such, but that's about it. We have to deal with the idea of swarm control constantly. We can't do a stopgap measure. So much of what you see on the internet is, oh, we'll just do this split at this time of year and you're good to go for the year. Yeah, doesn't really work down here. I have caught swarms, built them up, because I give them away. I catch swarms, I build them up, and I give them away. I'll catch a swarm, build it up, and during COVID particularly, people weren't really coming over to pick up bees, and next thing you know, the swarms I caught are swarming, because even though I put them in double nukes, it's like I don't want to go putting them in full-size boxes. I want to give away nukes, and next thing you know, the nukes are swarming. It's like, oh boy. So at any rate, I'm going to be referring to the notes because otherwise I tend to wander into many lanes of traffic. It's a good thing I don't drive that way. We have 3 months in late summer when they're less likely to swarm. Swarm control for us is a year-long pursuit. I'm doing a heavy paraphrase here, but there was a guy who said swarm control does not begin at conception, but back at the primal urge. It's a great line. Conception in this case means when they start building queen cells. You wait till they start building queen cells, you really should have been working a lot harder at it before then. Factors in the swarming impulse. Environmental. Now the first is temperature. The first is temperature. And rainy days notwithstanding, that doesn't really have much impact on us. Our bees can fly 365. There is never a day so cold that by noon the bees can't be out and about. Now, it's going to seem strange. Right here I'm saying this is not important, and at the bottom of this page I'm going to tell you how it's of utmost importance. But that's not ambient temperature, that's the temperature in the brood nest itself. Not even in the hive, just in the brood nest. The second is daylight. And this is a very important one. So, the coldest or the shortest day and the longest night is the winter solstice on December 21st. I expect that the bees will begin noticing that the days have started getting longer by within 10 days, right? Okay, so December 21st, winter solstice. Okay, December 26th, I had drone brood in my hives, capped drone brood in my hives. December 21st, December 26th, capped drone brood, all three hives. What is the first indicator? It's capped drone brood. It's drone brood at all. There is an under-recognized category of bees called the bookkeeper bees, right? They're running around with their little clipboards going, we have sufficient resources. We can start thinking about doing a split. We can think about, branching out and starting another franchise here. Those bees are the same bees who say, well, we have enough resources to expend energy on drone brood. If your hives can generate drone brood, they have the potential, if things go right, to generate a swarm. Okay? I was seeing red maples blooming by January 6th this year. Now, throughout the country, red maple is kind of the touchstone for the beginning of the beekeeping season. Whenever your red maples put out their blooms, which is not something you're not going to see unless you are into arboriculture or something, you're just really not going to see that too much because it doesn't look like anything. It's not like they're big showy flowers. But there are red maples in my area, and when they bloom, that's just a reconfirmation that, yep, we're coming into the season. Not that we didn't already know it. I'm in Tamarack, which is very central Fort Lauderdale area. Middle of Broward County. No, they're particularly Treetops Park, which is in Davie, is primarily designed around a natural red maple slough. Yes, we can grow red maples down here. If you get the seed from somewhere else, a lot of times they don't have sufficient resistance to phytophthora and other diseases like that, and they tend to be short-lived because they'll rot out from the inside. I'm sorry, I'm a certified arborist. You shouldn't push buttons like that. But yes, we can grow them, and yes, they are native to the area. Now, get back with me in 10 years on that, because at this point, where that slough is now definitely in Zone 11. It's no longer Zone 10B. That area is definitely in Zone 11. I think my house is in Zone 11 at this point. Pretty sure it is. And for us, Richardia, what we like to call Florida snow, buttonweed, Spanish needle, all these things were all blooming. Now, that's a pretty good income for the bees. It's kind of a minimum wage income for the bees, but there's lots of it, and it's there, and they're making good use of it, particularly that early on. But here about 10 days ago, the Bischofia started blooming up in my area. Not a lot of them left compared to 30 years ago, but the female Bischofias produce a tremendous amount of nectar. So what happened 2 days after the Bischofia started blooming? I just caught my first swarm. Okay. And I just got ahead of myself. Boy, I need to consult these notes more. So, December 21st, the winter solstice. Spring equinox, when day and night are equal. Everywhere through here, every day is longer than the day before. Every day is longer than the day before. But at this midpoint right here, Groundhog Day, February 2nd, this year, some days it's February 1st, some years, but February 2nd this year, Groundhog Day, the midpoint right here. February 2nd, you don't need to go looking at your trees or anything else. Everything that's going to go here, there's a starter's gun out there, boom. The bees are going to be getting really busy on February 2nd. Anything's going to happen after that. Like I just said, February 11th, caught my first swarm. Not from my hives. It's like, no, these are coming in from back over that way. My hives are over there. These guys just came in this way. But caught my first swarm just a few days after February 2nd. We are in full swing here. If you're not doing mitigation at this point, you're going to have more bees than you know what to do with before long. They just may not be staying at your house. Depends. Oh yes, this is important. Australian researchers, they do such good work down there. Australian researchers have determined that there is a significant stimulation of the swarm impulse at a time when there is a heavy pollen flow and a light nectar flow. And they say that that is exactly the definition of urban beekeeping. Think about it. We have lots and lots of flowering plants that, say, hibiscus, mango, acacias, lots and lots and lots of lots of flowers, but not a lot of nectar in any of those. So massive amounts of pollen available, but not nearly as much nectar. Heavy pollen flow, light nectar flow. So as soon as you start getting your first actual nectar flow, whatever that might be Melaleuca around here, I think, boom, swarms are going to start happening. Because they're going to get that first shot that, oh, hey, we've got enough resources here. There's a higher paying job over here, and we can go take that, and we can move into better quarters. So long before you start seeing a brood nest being backfilled with pollen and nectar, there was already a stimulus to swarm. It started with seeing drone brood in your hives. A good way to minimize drone brood is to use worker foundation. I'm a foundation-less beekeeper. I let the bees draw their own foundation. I have to contend with up to 20% drone brood in my hives. It's just my choice to do so. But if you use worker foundation, you can knock that down to 7%, no more than 10% at the top end if you consistently use foundation, worker-sized foundation in your hives, because they just don't have, they'll always find some place to lay drones, but they don't have the opportunity to lay them wherever they want to, like they do in my hives.
Good question.
Yep.
In your case with a strong drone population, do you see any kind of benefit or health loss of resources to feed drones?
Sure, you're always going to have a loss of resources to feed too many drones, but boy, it's amazing how quick they'll kick them out too. It's more a matter of, the jury is still out on what drones do other than sit around and consume resources and go out to bars. Okay, so, but they're more and more, they're thinking that drones have more functions in the hive than we've given them credit for up to now. So I'm not willing to forego whatever benefits might be there. I'm not making a living at this. It's my hobby in the backyard. I'll put up with it. And the thing is that when I pull out, oh, patch of drone brood, I just go, I keep them on their toes. The bees need extra work to do. I'll just whack the tops off those cells, make them drag out those larvae and start over again. But I let them do what they want to do with the drones. Yeah.
You mentioned worker group diameters. How many low is that? 5.2 or
Well, the smallest you can get is 4.9, but I think 5.2 is pretty average. Yeah. As I said, I'm a foundationalist beekeeper. So you're asking me a question. I mean, here's the way I give away bees. I catch them, I put them in, I cut the comb, I put it in, rubber band it into frames, put it in, I draw it all out, and then people come to me with their boxes. I give them the frames in their boxes, and they go home, and they leave me with frames. And sometimes they leave me with empty frames, and sometimes they just go ahead and leave me with the foundation. So I do find it useful to have foundation on hand. I use it more like a follower board than anything else. A lot of times, or like if I'm going to put a swarm of bees straight into a box, 5 frames. The middle frame I'll put empty foundation on, and the other 4 are 2 and 2 empty foundationless. That way, if they veer off the road, they can only veer off so far. Not so far that I can't pull 2 frames out, slice it, put it back where it belongs and such. So I do find it useful to have some around, but if they happen to build on it, they happen to build on it. If they don't build on it, I don't feel hurt or offended.
You use the plastic foundation wax coated, or use one of the wires?
Oh no, I use plastic foundation with a wax coating, and I usually thickly wax it if I'm going to bother to use it at all, just in case they do. So at any rate, oh, almost missed something there. But the biggest trigger, or one of the big triggers for swarming, is the temperature inside the brood nest. Mind you, I didn't say the temperature inside the hive. I said the temperature inside the brood nest. Because all of the worker bees, all the open brood, the hatched out brood, they all want to be around the queen. And so they'll cluster too tightly around her sometimes, and they can raise the temperature up too high. And it's like you're at the front row of a concert or something, and everybody's crowding around you. You can feel really, really crowded in there. And you need to do something to address that. My favorite way of addressing that is a slatted rack. It gives the bees some place to hang out other than having to go outside the hive because they're overheating the hive on the inside. I like a screen bottom board, but most importantly, I use solid bottom boards, I use screen bottom boards, I use solid bottom boards that I've cut slots in and put screen over just so they have some ventilation in the middle of them, because they do work a lot better that way, even if you're using technically a solid bottom board. But the most important thing is the slatted rack. I love them. If you haven't used them, you really should be. Everybody that I've ever turned on to it has thanked me many times over for using slatted racks. It's something that's only cost effective for backyard beekeepers. I realize it's not really for commercial guys, but backyard beekeepers, check out slatted racks if you haven't used them. Okay. Can you repeat that word? Slatted, S-L-A-T-T-E-D. I'll just write it up here. Slatted rack, available at South Florida Bee Supply. Let me tell you, if you walk out and your bees are in a pile on the front of the hive and you don't know whether they're getting ready to swarm or whether they're just, it's too hot outside, well, you lift that up, you put a slotted rack in there, you put it down, you walk out there the next afternoon, it's as hot or hotter as it was the day before. It's like, oh my God, they swarmed. There's no bees on the front of the hive. They didn't swarm. You just gave them a front porch underneath the hive to hang out in, where they'd rather be than out in front in the storms and the rain and everything, or pushed inside where they're overheating things. It helps a lot to cool off the brood chamber area, the brood nest actually, where the bees are actually maintaining 95 degrees over the brood, if you have some place for the extra bees to hang out. And that's not the only way you can do that. You can also do that with a pair of follower boards. If you're not familiar with follower boards, they're 3/4 inches wide, whereas a frame is 1 3/8 inches wide. So 2 of these put together is the width of 1 frame. It replaces 1 frame in the hive, but you put them on the outside edges of the hive. Now, of course, you can use the follower board for its intended purpose, which is, oh, I have an 8-frame box and I have bees here that are only covering 3 combs. So you can push it in like that and you can make basically a nuke in the middle of an 8-frame or 10-frame box, right? But if you want to use them as a management tool, you put them right out there at the perimeter. Takes the space of 1 frame, and they're just right there, and it allows the bees to hang vertically, not only on the back side of it, but on the front side of it. They're not doing anything there, but you can hang an awful lot of bees on 2 frame-sized pieces of wood on the edges of the hive. It keeps them out of the way. It keeps them where they can fan and ventilate if they want to, and it works well. Now, this time of year, I would still be using a regular inner cover. Later on, you might want to use a screened inner cover. I don't. I usually keep a feeder shim on my hives 365 just because I'm used to doing so. And it allows me sometimes to check the bees. I can open it up, look, because I use rapid feeders. I can look through the lid and go, oh, even though there hadn't been anything in there in a month and a half, there's still lots of bees checking to see if there's something in there. We may be going into a dearth. If I opened up and there's nobody in there, it's like, oh, they're all too busy outside getting something to eat. Okay, good. But slatted racks, I should probably write that down too. Slatted rack and follower boards.
Could have been bees that put a lot of bird home propolis all over the slatted rack.
Nope. A slatted rack is designed, and slatted racks today. Slatted racks were originally the invention of Dr. C.C. Miller back around 1898. And when he built them, when he first developed them, I guess he started with something that was the proto-slatted rack, and then when he developed the slatted rack, he actually had the bars going this way in it. But a slatted rack follows the bars of the hive, 8-frame or 10-frame, depending. And so they are sitting right at 3/8 of an inch below the frames. They are slightly indented, just like everything else. So you've basically got bee space at the bottom, and then you've got all those spaces in between. I have never yet, and I've been using slatted racks for 6 years or more now, I've never yet pulled a frame out and had the slatted rack stuck to it. There's never been a bit of burr comb underneath there. But I've always respected the bee space. I'm not using weird sized boxes or anything like that. Everything, has the normal level of precision you expect from Lancaster's equipment.
Your screen models. What's the space between your bottom of your slatted rack and the screen bottom? Is there a couple inches?
It's about 2 inches. But it doesn't matter because the frames are right above the slats in the slatted rack. So for all intents and purposes, that's the end of the colony.
I wonder if they're going to hang on the slatted rack and hang down.
That doesn't happen. I'll tell you what does happen, or has happened to me once in the past, was that I had forgotten to put a frame back in. And so there was a frame here, and it was over this slatted rack, and there was an opening here and an empty piece of slatted rack here, and the bees built comb off of it and down past the slatted rack. That happened one time, but that was not actually attached to the slatted rack itself. It was like, oh, look, there's a space here, whoop, and they went down into it. But they have never gone down between the bars, even with the swarm cell. They've never gone down between the bars, in between there. So the slatted racks are a very clean piece of equipment.
I was under the impression, a lot of people have said that just by having a slatted rack allows your hive to be a lot cooler and to reduce swarming.
That's what I'm saying.
And with the screen on the bottom, I mean, here it is tropical climate.
Mm-hmm.
Does that even make it even better?
Yes. Well, then we'll go totally off topic here, but I'll answer the question. He wants to know if it makes it even better. Again, Dr. C.C. Miller, 1898, prior to his development of the slatted rack, he was taking old boxes, cutting them into 4-inch shims. Why 4 inches, I don't really quite know. and he was setting those on the bottom of his hives with the front cut out. It was doing the same job. It was allowing the bees to have a space to hang out underneath there, and he considered that to be an advantage, but they would build comb down from it. Not burr comb, they would just build comb straight down from it, and not even bridge comb. They were building brood comb from the bottom of their frames underneath there. Just like if you put a medium frame in a deep box surrounded by deep frames, you're going to get it off the bottom. And he just considered that part. It was a price he paid for his management technique. He would just slice that stuff off sometimes. You know, if it was full of honey, he'd leave it. You know, if it was full of, I don't know really what he did to it, but he very quickly evolved from that open space when he saw that it had value in preventing bearding on the outside of the hive. He very quickly evolved from that into making the slatted rack that went directly underneath them and had space underneath that. Slatted racks, most wonderful piece of equipment, so underused in South Florida, it's amazing.
How big is the area that you hang on the rods?
The rods are about 3/8 of an inch thick, and they're the same width as the bottom of a frame. And so there's probably 5/8 between them. Go to South Florida Bee Supply, buy one and measure it. I didn't come here and I talked about slatted racks. I didn't bring a bunch of measurements with me. Really? That's where I bought all mine. You might have to ask him to whip some up for you. Yeah. That's the same way I swear by their PVC screen bottom boards. Oh my goodness, do I love their bottom boards. Yes, sir.
The slatted rack goes underneath the frames?
Yes, sir. It goes on top of the bottom board so that when you put the hive body down, it is exactly parallel underneath the frames.
Okay.
And right at 3/8 of an inch. It honors the bee space. They can go underneath and they can come back up just like they would if it was a regular bottom board, but they're above the bottom board. I'm glad there was.
That would actually, so if I have this as a solid bottom, I'll leave my solid
If you have a solid bottom boards, you will thank me if you get some of these particularly.
Okay, I was just doing a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Either way, I leave that there and then I put that on top.
On top of it,
And then I put my brood box on top.
on top of that.
Okay, I guess I'll be going shopping tomorrow.
Well, if he says he didn't see any over there, you might want to call up and see if they have any. If they don't, can you whip some up?
Yeah, I'll call George in the morning.
All righty.
You mentioned something like you had a screen intercom. Can you explain a little about that? Is that
I rarely use them anymore myself, but
cooling or something?
it is for extra ventilation. I have all these screened inner covers that I don't use except when I'm moving hives. Because if you put a screened inner cover, I mean, it's just like a regular, instead of having a piece of plywood there, it has a piece of number 8 hardware cloth on it. The better ones have a couple of cross pieces. A lot of them are just open throughout the whole middle, but you put that on there, and whether you're using a telescoping cover or whether you're using a transport cover, either one, it puts on there and it gaps it off about this much. It's sealed on the bottom, so the bees can't get out, but it gaps whichever lid you use about that high off so that there can be ventilation out the top. Now, bees don't care about that in my experience. They really don't. They'll do their best. They'll never succeed, but they'll do their best to seal that up. All of my feeder shims have multiple 2-inch holes covered with number 8 cloth in them. And the first thing the bees do if I put a new one down is seal that up. Bees really don't seem to care too much about there being a ventilation out the top. Bees don't care that much about there being ventilation out the bottom. Bees do just fine with a hole that big around, and they can calculate their own ventilation there most of the time. This is as much for our comfort as theirs. We're trying to do well by our bees. But push come to shove, they'll survive either way. I'm just trying to make things easier on them when I do some of these things. But you'd be surprised. I mean, I swear by the ventilated bottom boards, but I swear by the slatted rack the most. And everyone that I have turned onto the slatted rack, you know, it's like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. There's this huge, looks like there's more bees outside the hive than inside the hive. I don't know what they're getting ready to do. Go get some slatted racks. And they'll come back next time they see me and go, it's amazing. It is just absolutely amazing. So you can stop worrying about that part of, oh, is that a swarm about to happen, or is that just afternoon temperature control inside the hive? Because they've got room.
So it sounded to me like the top screen cover that you were describing and put the lid on it, L-shaped lid. It almost sounds like you created a pollen trap. I mean, a propolis trap.
No.
They don't fill it up in a crazy.
As I said, they'll never succeed. Every one of my screened inner covers has a band of propolis about this wide around it, but that's about as far as they ever get. So they still have plenty of ventilation there, but they're spending a lot of time and effort doing that. That's why I stopped using them, because they don't really like them that much. So where I think it's necessary, like if I'm going to transport them somewhere, I'm definitely going to always use a screened inner cover so that I can crank them down tight, but I know they've still got plenty of ventilation. Otherwise, I don't tend to use them. I tend to use either a standard inner cover, because they're never going to do anything with that little hole there. All right. And I have found more uses for a standard inner cover. I'm gonna do a video very soon on the conclusions of some experiments that I did comparing queen excluders and using a standard inner cover. The results will surprise you. I love reading old bee books. I love reading bee books from the 1880s through the 1930s. And let me tell you, we haven't invented anything new. And most of the people that are keeping bees today do not have the concentration and focus of those old-time beekeepers. They were experimenters par excellence. They experimented on a grand scale. They took meticulous notes, and they discussed it with each other through the journals. And then half of them wrote a book on it. And all of these things that we have invented, they were doing in the 1930s and the 1920s. 1915 was a great year for beekeepers, I gotta say. But 1880s on particularly, there's just not that much that we've invented that they hadn't already come up with. If they had had our materials back then, beekeeping would be 100 years ahead of where it is right now. If they had had our materials to work with, if they hadn't had to use tin plate to make their queen excluders out of, if they had had access to plastics. Oh my goodness, I have read entire books on the invention of comb, or of artificial comb. Back then they were making comb out of aluminum sheets. Aluminum foundation. Stamp. It didn't work, but they tried it. But let's get back to where we were. Well, we can yak about all this when I get through this part, if you don't mind. Okay. So you can help regulate heat with a screen bottom board and, my favorite, the slatted rack. You can also use a pair of follower boards at the edges of the box so they have vertical space to hang in. And later in the spring, you can switch from a standard inner cover to a screened inner cover if you want to. I don't find it necessary myself. At this point, you're all saying, wait a minute, that's all ventilation. It is that too. But to me right now, it's giving them room in the brood nest before you're ready to put on supers. You've got to get a good population going in there before it's time to put on the supers. But if that population is choking out your brood nest, again, fans swarming the stage sort of thing, then that's problematical. Give them some place to be. Give them that slatted rack underneath. Give them those bleacher seats up here on the sides so they can hang out. And you're in better shape. You're not generating that overheating. That bookkeeper bee I was talking about, he's got a thermometer in his pocket too. So, they're always out there making notes. Now, as the commercial guys will tell you, one of the best ways to prevent spring swarming is to introduce a new young queen in the spring. Basically, a lot of the commercial guys, they throw new queens and everything in the spring, and they slap on a couple of supers, and that's most of their swarm control. Well, good for them. It never worked for me. And by that, I don't mean that it didn't stop swarming. I don't know whether it would or wouldn't have. I have, on many occasions, bought new queens from local breeders up in the West Palm and Broward area, both, and I have introduced them. And almost without exception, there's one exception I can think of. I had one queen that did very well for me for 2 years. But almost without exception, I would introduce a new queen. She would be accepted. And then she would lay up a patch of brood no bigger than my hand. And then there'd be a supersedure cell right in the middle of it. They don't care for these fancy pedigreed queens. You know, the mutts want mutts. And so as soon as they could, they started a supersedure cell so that they could send a queen out on her own to get mated with what they wanted. It's been a huge waste of money for me, a huge waste of effort, and a huge waste of time. My bees like their local mutts. That's all there is to it. The term Africanized, African-derived, whatever you want to say, believe it or not, I tend to think that the bees that we have here in South Florida right now, I have this wonderful little manual from the state of Florida from 1948. And it describes the native black bee. And by that, I mean the German bee that was brought into the United States back in 1622. All right, the native European black honeybee. And in terms of temperament and fussiness and everything else, the description of these bees in that manual was a perfect match for the level of feistiness that we have in our bees down here. Okay? They're not as dangerous as those Arizona Africanized bees by any means. And you know what? We all agree. You do cutouts. Do you agree that every year the bees are getting calmer? Is that working that way for you down here?
Well, I would put it another way, that maybe it's feisty.
One feisty out of 20 cutouts.
Something like that, maybe two.
No, that's exactly the example I'm making. Compared to 7 years ago, when I started this, there is no comparison. And some of the people in our club do this for a living every day of the week. And they'll come in just gushing about this latest swarm or this latest cutout they did. Not a swarm. Swarms are always nice unless they've been hungry for 3 or 4 days because it was raining or something. But they'll have done this massive cutout. And it's like, you can't believe this massive cutout I just did, and I didn't take a single sting. And this is a guy who half the time doesn't even wear a veil. They're getting calmed down. So the reason that the state put out this manual in 1948 was they were encouraging the beekeepers of Florida, which was just about every person that had land. They were encouraging the beekeepers of Florida to buy Italian queens and bring them in and requeen with them. Okay? And you know what? There's no real trace of the black bee left down here. And yeah.
I was at Gainesville, they said that their scarcest chicken season are still there.
I'm thinking that somewhere out in the Everglades, there must still be some of the original black bees. But I asked Jamie Ellis that very question not 2 years ago, and he said there weren't any. So this is more recent information. If you're saying that now, they're saying that there are still a few colonies of the original black bee out there. But it's the same way. They said that I am not completely convinced of that because A, we don't have any records of it, and B, we do have records of the fact that the Spanish government refused on several occasions to allow the importation of honeybees because they wanted these colonies to be self-sufficient and to be putting money back in the coffers of Spain. And one way to do that was they had to buy beeswax candles to celebrate the Catholic Mass. So it was a market. If they kept control and didn't allow honeybees to come into St. Augustine, then there was a market for beeswax candles. So we don't have the proof of it. We don't have first-hand records of it. And we do have discussions and data to the fact that they weren't allowing them in, which doesn't mean that 1 year after that record was written, somebody didn't change their mind and bring them in. But, you know, the white man's fly has always managed to get ahead of the white man by 7 to 10 miles in leaps and bounds. So there was plenty of time before the English started getting into Florida for the European black honeybee to have gotten down here too. And we wouldn't know the difference because genetically there was no difference between a honeybee from Spain and a honeybee from England or a honeybee from France. They were all, you know, the same genetic stock. And I have read many, many accounts of the incredible difficulties they were having in figuring out a way to get bees down here. And indeed, I just recently was reading a book written in 1938 on the history of American beekeeping. And it was telling about the difficulties. And this is starting around the gold rush era, 1849, 1880, between that period. They were trying to get bees out to California. And there were bounties paid, there were rewards to be had, and there were lots of people trying lots of different ways, and it was not an easy thing. In fact, the first bees that actually made it didn't go by ship. Most of the ones that went by ship, you know, they would send 50 hives, and 3 got there, but none of them survived long enough to split. The first honeybees that got out there started by coming across and going to Salt Lake City in that area. And then from there, no, there's a market. They made splits. They took them on west to California. So it isn't that easy to get bees across the ocean.
I was just thinking, like you were saying there, I can't imagine having a beehive on a ship for 4 months trying to cross the Atlantic.
If it was being properly taken care of, the bees could be allowed to fly every day. They would come out, orient, do their business, come back, and you keep them fed. But rarely was anybody with any expertise put on board that ship with those bees to take care of them, is one of the problems. And, well, you can compare it to, they were trying to get the Italian honeybee over here. You would be amazed at the number of failed attempts to get Italian honeybee queens into this country before they actually got a breeding stock. But darn it, you people need to stop doing this. I got something to get through here. I can talk, you know, I have another t-shirt that says, I don't always talk about bees. Oh, wait, yes, I do. But, all right. Now, the commercial guys will tell you one of the best ways to prevent spring swarming is to introduce a new young queen in the spring. And that's true, I guess, in most of the country. But since they're hard to find down here at that time of year in the spring, and since we don't have to worry about winter, you could requeen all your colonies with young queens in November, particularly right after November 1st, because that is also a pertinent date, the same way February 2nd is. But November 1st, that is the day after Halloween, I am always out there reducing my hives. I'm an all-medium beekeeper. So for me, 3 boxes is my brood chamber. And the 1st of November, irregardless of what might be going on in chamber number 3, they're going to get compressed down to 2 boxes. Because I can turn my back for 2 days after November 1st, and the bees may suddenly just decide to shrink down some, and I would be losing comb to small hive beetles and particularly wax moths. If you watch my videos, you'll find that we've got a pretty good solution for small hive beetles down here. I have yet to find a decent solution for wax moths. Those lures don't really work worth piddle as far as I'm concerned so far. Okay, that's the end of part 1 of the talk. We'll release part 2 next week. So stay tuned.